First of all, let me welcome everyone here. Thank you so much. I was just sharing with you before that this session, it comes after two very inspiring sessions. The first of today was about media and its impact. And then the second one was the stories and the strategies of 6 of our fellows from across the world for growth, scale up, scale deep, and scale out. As we said from the beginning, the Get Wiser Summit is a celebration to honor the Women's Month. But also in Ashoka, we believe that we need and want and need a world where everyone is a change maker, and we cannot have a world without having women who are 50% as women and girls to be part of, to be recognized and part of the movement. The summit, the 3 days of the summit are really, we wanted the space for joy and celebration and women voices. That's why today is sessions about whys and impact and strategies of the shakers and movers of the ecosystem. Tomorrow is open space for a lot of our fellows and colleagues to share their own stories. And the third day is really a lot of our fellows also to speak and talk in their own language. One of the most important things about the summit is really for us to get the shapers and movers of the ecosystem, media, policymakers, researchers, funders, investors, enablers, to come in and share and join the movement where we are trying to redefine success, or actually, and not introduce something new, but realize that to recognize women's impact, we have to see beyond just the scaling out. So scaling out, which was known previously as scaling up, is when you franchise and reach more people, which is important, but also women scale deep when they change mindsets and beliefs and patterns of behavior, and scale up when they change policies, and it does affect millions and millions of people. And this is really a movement where we want everyone to join, and we want everyone to be part of it. When we did a study in 2018 for 900 of our fellows, we noticed one of the observations and findings of the research in Ashoka was that mainly a lot of our women social entrepreneurs scale deep and up more than they scale out, because they are not because they are different, except that they are cause driven. They're usually driven by a cause that is relevant to their lifestyles or an inequality they see. So they're much more about mindsets and patterns of behavior and beliefs that sometimes affect the target group they're working with, or they're changing a law again that is not fair. But when we're talking in WISE, we're not talking about gender or gender empowerment. We're talking about women who are excelling, who are having impact in every field. And this is important. In climate change, in AI, in technology, in health, and also empowering others, whether it's women or others, children, and other vulnerable groups. So it's very important. And in order for us to influence the ecosystem so that they recognize women's impact, we want everyone who is involved in the ecosystem to give us their feedback, to tell us how they see this new framework that we are trying to introduce, and because it belongs to everybody. And we want to see this more clearer when we are investing in women-led organizations or women social entrepreneurs. So the summit is just one of the things we are doing in order to get you, and you here in this session are the policymakers and enablers, and to hear you and to listen to what you have from your experience working with women social entrepreneurs and being social entrepreneurs yourselves and being leaders in the field, to come and share with us your perspective. In this session, we will discuss tangible steps for how leaders and policymakers in the social innovation sector can better support women social entrepreneurs and change the current definitions or add to the current definition. So, as I said, we do believe that replication and franchising is a very important growth mechanism, but we also want to recognize the scaling deep and the scaling up. The changing of mindsets, which is what we call scaling deep, and the scaling upward when we change policies and affect millions, not only now, but in the future. So enough of my introduction. Welcome to the WISE movement, and welcome as leaders of the ecosystem that will influence the future. The way we'll go is we will go a little bit more than the 1 hour to probably Claire will not be happy, but we will go a little bit more than 1 hour because I want you to share your insights. And the coming session is discussions where I will ask each one of you a question and then go back to you again. And then at the end, we will talk about recommendations and the steps forward. So I will start with Peggy. And Peggy Gilani, founder and chair of Synergos. Synergos is a global organization helping solve complex issues around the world by advancing bridging leadership, which builds trust and collective action. Peggy founded Synergos in 1986 to promote trust and collaboration among grassroots groups and government or business leaders and organizations. And she's also an honor graduate of Radcliffe College and holds a doctorate in education from Harvard University. Thank you very much for joining us, Peggy. And here's the you have worked extensively to build spaces for bridging leadership, which I think is brilliant. For example, through your work founding and leading Synergos and the Global Philanthropic Circle, which I find very impressive. My question would be, how can strategies for bridging leadership be applied to changing current definitions of success and getting the whole ecosystem on board? Mm-hmm. How do you marry them together or see any,
Yeah. So I actually consider the notion of bridging across divides an essentially feminine quality. I think the masculine antithesis of that is to go straight to solutions. Bridging requires, first of all, a certain amount of inner work so that you don't have a lot of what I would call neurotic static in the way of being able to really listen openly with your heart and your mind. And also to be willing to reach out across divides in a courageous way, even while you may have fears. So the inner work really has to do with knowing yourself well enough to stand aside from the fears. So you aren't your fear. You notice that you have fears. And then based on that openness and that perception, you're able to really listen deeply. And this is something that I think has been lost in the traditional masculine hierarchy. It hasn't been appreciated. And I think it's coming to be appreciated precisely because of the state that the world is in right now. So I'll stop there on this, but I could always come back to it.
Thank you so much. I really like the way you approached it. And I think you're right. It has been lost and I think it is coming back because of people like you. Nadine Richani, Regional Director for MENA at Porticus, which is a partner for Ashoka and the WISE movement. Nadine is the Regional Director at Porticus, and Porticus is an international organization that manages and develops the philanthropic programs of charitable entities. Nadine started her career working with NGOs, but she also worked in the private sector, consulting on strategy development and project management, and she continues to engage in training and coaching for social initiatives. So Nadine, thank you so much for being with us here. My question is, at our recent WISE roundtable, she was with us in the WISE Up roundtable, you talked about how critical it is that we create new metrics for measuring and assessing impact. So what strategies do you believe we can employ? How can we do this? How can we really actively and aggressively, how we evaluate, not even measure the scale deep and scale up?
Yeah. So staying with the theme of the summit here, let's really think of how are we scaling up and scaling deep the measurement metrics themselves. So in my view, scaling deep here is about working with the women who are leading projects to define success together with them and with those who they serve through their projects. And scaling up would be what we are discussing in this session, that is creating systemic change at donor level in how we measure success and not only what we are measuring. That is the approaches we use in implementing any metrics. As long as the donor community imposes top-down metrics for measuring success, we will stay behind on really collecting quality evidence of impact, and we will miss to learn. And here I don't mean just us as a donor, but the joint learning of the donor community and the grantees. Ideally, we get to the point where this success is owned by the woman leading the project and by those who are participating in it or they are served by it. So I would like to remind us here that from a donor perspective, we are obviously accountable for those who are providing the sources of the money being invested in projects, but we are also accountable towards those who have lived experience on the ground. So working together and the leaders of these projects to define the metrics for success is very important. Now, obviously, this comes with its own challenges. This is partly why many praise the merits of such participatory approaches, but only few walk the talk. It is more time consuming, it is costly, it is culture sensitive. However, it is worth the effort on the long run. It's much more true. So I suppose to summarize, what I'm trying to say here is that instead of sharing with you what the metrics that we use are, or what are the best metrics, I'm saying let's walk side by side with the women and let them define the metrics together with us.
I think this is a very, I agree with you totally, and I think it's important for women to recognize the impact, as you said, and then we all work together, and that's part of how also women social entrepreneurs work. They collaborate. Going from there, and we're coming back, I'll come back to every one of you. I would like to introduce Latanya Mapfred, President and CEO of Global Fund for Women, which works. Global Fund for Women is very close to my heart because it supported my other organization many years ago. And it works to strengthen gender justice movements to shift power, privilege, perception, and create meaningful change. A lot of things that the Global Fund for Women is doing, but from experience, they do it. And previously, Latanya was the executive director of Planned Parenthood Global. She also worked for UNICEF and for USAID. So extensive, different types of experience that I think is very relevant to our question today. So Latanya,
yes.
One of the questions I will ask you. First of all, thank you for waking up at 5:30 in the morning. But previously, as the executive director of Planned Parenthood Global, you quadrupled, really, which is very impressive, the size of the program, which was your approach to this successful scaling. And how might such an approach be applied to changing current definitions? We believe that if you can do it in one sphere, you can do it anywhere. Can you think of, your secret and how we can do this to also impact the ecosystem?
Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate being here with all of you today, all of my panelists and friends. Hello. So I'll just, I hope it sounds a little bit like an echo, but I hope you guys can hear it okay. Oh,
okay.
So with Planned Parenthood Global, and I would say with other organizations that I served, I think I'm gonna follow Peggy and Nadine and say the first secret sauce is that you have to center the woman. And so for us at Planned Parenthood, it meant centering her as a patient, but also addressing all her intersectional inequalities. And so as all of us know, a woman doesn't walk into the clinic as just a patient. She comes in as a mother, as a wife, as someone that runs a home, someone that usually has a business, someone that usually has so many other economic and social activities going on in her life. And when she comes into that clinic, the support she needs is not just the service that she's getting today, but so much more. And we knew that centering the patient was going to be the first thing that had to be done. And so I think in any program, we have to center the woman. We have to ask what's necessary. We have to build that relationship and determine what her idea of success, the reason that she came in, and how we can support her in all aspects of her life. And so I would say, secondly, for most of the work that we do, not just at Planned Parenthood, but at Global Fund for Women, it is building these partnerships around resources. And so sometimes this power dynamic between donor and grantee, a donor and organization, I think gets too much credit. We talked about how and where the solutions come from. I think that's where Peggy and Nadine were talking. And that solution has to come from the community of which is most expected. And so for us, what we had to do was sort of flip a little bit of how we were doing it, creating these strategies somewhere in New York or Nairobi, wherever the regional office was, and then pushing them out into the communities of the countries where we work. Instead, flipping that and working with organizations that were already doing amazing things and trying to support what they were doing in the world, what their ideas of success look like. And even though that may change from community to community or country to country, by being a good partner, we felt like we would be able to see the success that eventually we did see. And then I would add some cherries on top to that secret sauce. And that looked like adding in technology and innovation. So not just digital transformations, but working with women on things that had never been done before, but that they felt strongly would be really good for the patient, for the work, for the outcomes that we were all seeking. And so I think I call that a cherry on top in some ways, because I think we all
So Latanya, we can't hear you, but can you hear me, everyone?
I can hear you now, but I did see some cooling or something. Are you okay? Should I repeat that last part? Or are you okay?
Maybe the last sentence, so that we can.
Okay, I was just saying the cherry on top to the secret sauce is adding two things: technology and innovation, and then young people. And I'll just end with young people, because I feel like we miss the boat sometimes by only focusing on one sector of women, and saying, okay, well, this is the group we're going to work with, and forgetting to add in young women who eventually will become a part of the program, and in many cases are already sort of setting the chart for the work that needs to be done moving forward. So those are the ways, Iman, that I was able to grow the program there, and hopefully now at Global Fund for Women. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think all of you talked about how we need patient capital. And we can talk about this later, where the investors or the donors are patient enough to work in a participatory manner, which is easily said than done. But let me go to our only wonderful man. Thank you, Mamadou, you're back. And Mamadou BTA, Vice President of Social Impact for the Central CMEA, which is Central America and Middle East, and in the WISER company. So he's from the private sector. However, he has 25 years of experience in strategic leadership and advocacy and campaigning and community development. Prior to WISER, he served at the Rockefeller Foundation as Managing Director for the Africa region, and was also before that Region Director for West Africa at Oxfam, Great Britain, and Oxfam America. So thank you so much for joining us, and for being a man advocate in the WISE movement, because I think it should affect everybody. Our question is, through your work with the Rockefeller Foundation and now with WISER as a company, what strategies for achieving social impact have you found most successful? You can differ with us. We might, fight with you, but you can differ with us.
Thank you, man, and greetings to everyone. I'm so honored to join this team, and also so happy to see familiar faces, including my former bosses here, and that's just amazing. Just to say that for me, from what I've seen, is really the intentionality of what we are doing, and how do you incorporate that into your strategies. For instance, when I'm looking at the private sector or corporations where I'm working in, we see really different approaches. Some who see really social impact as something on the side, distinct from the core business, which actually does good things, but is really suboptimal and is not transformative at scale. I think that when we talk about corporations, it's really where there is an opportunity to leverage what I could call the superpowers of the company, right? Its core business. its products and solutions, its geographic footprint. It's all meaning really leveraging its total strengths to be able to achieve the impact at scale. And for me, that is successful or only if it is actually embedded within the business. It is a part of the core strategy of the component, so that it is not just a task for a team that is called CSR or ESG team or social impact team or what have you, but that is part of becomes the lens through which you develop new products and solutions. This is part of the lens. You are looking at how do you deploy those products and solutions? How do you intentionally invest into underprivileged, traditionally excluded groups, and actually really making that trade-off between, the impact on your next, report or your bottom line in the next 6 months or in the next 1 year, but actually really looking at this from a long-term sustainability point of view, right? Knowing that you can, by doing that good, you can forego some maybe immediate impact today, but actually investing and building a more prosperous society, that will pay off in the future. You are on mute, Iman.
So I said, thank you so much. Yeah, me and technology. Thank you so much. And I think, again, we are saying what should be done, and it's important. Later on, we have to say, how can we make it happen? Because, again, it is about patient capital and patient investors. I want to go to a very close friend of mine, whom we've known for a long time. We will not say how many years. Kavita Ramdas, the director of the Women's Rights Program, Open Society Foundation. And she also served before that as a strategy advisor for Madre, and she founded the K&R Sisters, an independent consulting venture. From 2012 to 2016, she led the Ford Foundation's operations in South Asia, and she also founded SEERS, which is the Social Entrepreneurs in Residence program at Stanford University. So Kavita, I know you very well, and therefore I think the question is relevant. And the question is, we define scaling as changing mindsets and norms as well as policies, in addition to the scaling out. But really what matters to us is the scaling up and the scaling deep, which is mindsets and policies. As a funder, but also as a social entrepreneur and a women's advocate, how would you describe impact, and how can we, again, the same question, how do you think we should measure it? And how can we convince everybody to measure it the way we want them to?
Thanks, Iman. Salam and namaste to everyone. Now you have to mute yourself, Iman. Otherwise, we have an echo.
Oh.
Great. So salam and namaste to everybody. And I'm so honored to see so many friends and colleagues here amongst us. I am particularly mindful about this question about impact, Iman, because I think it has been often used. Actually, I was just reading a recent report that was released last year in May by Bridgespan and Echoing Green on racial inequity in the field of philanthropy. And one of the really revealing comments that was made is that the word impact is often used as code to screen out people by virtue of gender, by virtue of race, by virtue of sort of not being in the in group. And I think that that's actually a very important issue for us to acknowledge. And I think, from your long history of doing work at Ashoka and much before that, that even within the space of social entrepreneurship, and we talked about this last time, there was often a kind of a very, as Peggy put it in her opening comments, there was a very male framing of what a social entrepreneur looked like. And I would say it was in the framing of what we call like the heroic figure, one guy on a white horse leading like all the troops who are walking long far behind. that isn't the model by which most women who are organizing in communities for social change, whether it's for labor rights or economic justice or climate change work, that isn't the model that they use to organize. They use a model that is deeply rooted in the community. They use a model that is measuring the impact on the community. They are very concerned not about like how many people are reached by it, but whether the issue that they're dealing with is addressed. So if there is a broken pipe and a sewer is spewing dirty, filthy water into the local drinking water stream, they are focused on getting that addressed, you know. And I remember a long time ago when I was running the Global Fund for Women, Nike came to us and said, well, you know, we've seen this program that you support in this one space in Afghanistan. It was when Sakina Yaqubi of Afghan Institute for Learning was running these amazing schools in different parts of the country. And they were like, yes, but you know, that only serves 300 girls. So in our experience, we say that if there is a store and it's selling 300 sneakers, the next year we want the store to be selling 10,000 sneakers. So for us, this is scale. And we want to see now, how does this school go from having 300 girls to 10,000 girls? And I remember Sakina and myself just kind of like shaking our heads and saying, you know, first, making a difference in the lives of young people is not selling shoes. So this analogy of scale by just simply numbers is, I think, something we have to realize is deeply ingrained in our capitalist way of framing results and outcomes. And I think we all in the social entrepreneurship field have to, because we have gained credibility by using the term entrepreneurs as opposed to activists or as opposed to advocates for social change, entrepreneurs has been given credibility by whom? By the mainstream business world. Because that, sorry, Mamadou, but the mainstream business world likes to think about business as being kind of the criteria against which all other outcomes and impact should be measured. But in social entrepreneurship, the measurements that we are talking about are fundamentally transformative measurements that will actually change the ways in which people who have long been excluded from decision-making now have a chance to be part of the decisions. So I think these are some of the kinds of concerns we have to think about when we're thinking about impact. And we have to think that it is not just questions of numbers. It is not just questions of, how many resources you've been able to gather to address that question. But it is also very, very important to see what is it that you're trying to transform. And I'll just end with one more story. When I was at Stanford, there was an article that had come out from the folks at the Skoll Foundation, also, you know, big on social entrepreneurship, right? And they argued that Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. King, Martin Luther King, could not be considered social entrepreneurs because they were activists, because they didn't have like a real solution to the problem. They were just mobilizing, the masses. And I thought, okay, this right here is the problem. If you cannot see that long-lasting systemic change of the kind that Gandhi and King were actually able to create in their societies is not impactful, 1,000 times more impactful than some technical solution for cleaning, drinking water or something to hold a baby, an incubator. Not that those things are wrong, but this measurement of social entrepreneur in a technical frame is what I think we have to move away from. And we have to stop allowing private capital business to be able to define what the metrics are for us as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know why we're friends. But before I introduce Korto, I would like to add a couple of things. First of all, Sakina is an Ashoka Fellow. Although we don't have an office in Afghanistan, and although our office in DC sometimes thinks Afghanistan is part of the Arab world, we elected her here. Doesn't matter. You adapt. But we elected her here in the Arab world because she's wonderful. But I always start my training with explaining entrepreneur. I think people forget that entrepreneur is a French word for adventurer and risk taker. And I always start by saying Bill Gates and Steve Jobs were not entrepreneurs because they made money. Actually, Steve Jobs was going to bankrupt his company and he was thrown out. They're entrepreneurs because they're opening new markets, they're addressing real problems. And even the Ashoka, which is our name, was because this is the guy who solved real social problems. And I always tell the business guys, Mamadou, that if you want a stable market, if you want people to buy your products, you have to solve the social problems. And this is what social entrepreneurs do. Our part in ideas of social entrepreneurs and education, we might have less bad people. Let me call them bad people, you know. But anyway, so this is like music to my heart. So I go to Corto. Corto is unable, she's a beautiful woman, so I can tell you this from now on, but she's unable to open her video. And let me introduce Corto. Let me find, yeah, here. So Corto Williams is currently the global head of women's rights in ActionAid International. She has over 13 years working in that organization in several positions, including country director of Liberia. And she has 20 years of experience working across Africa, in the Middle East, the Americas, with USAID and UNDP. She's also very proudly a feminist, an African feminist and strategic civil society leader in Liberia. And so thank you so much, Corto, for joining us. And my question, which when I find it would be nice. Yeah. My question to you, Corto, is you are one of our world's leading feminists, and you are recognized as an advocate and an activist for collective organizing of women. What is the power of the collective? And it would really be, it's very suitable to what Kavita was saying now. And what power do you see as women as a collective having in changing current definitions of success? So you believe in the collective. I actually believe that too, and Kavita too, and I'm sure all of us. Can you just see how can this impact the changing of the ecosystem to understand us more?
Okay. Thank you, Iman, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of this panel. I've listened to everyone, and I believe that this conversation is something that is going to be significant in terms of the way that we move into a post-COVID environment, especially the way that we look at philanthropy, our programs that we run on a regular basis, but also in terms of our engagement with different groups of people at national, regional, and global levels. So I work with ActionAid as the head of global, as the global head of women's rights. And I'm also a feminist activist. I tend to hold the feminist activist title more, in terms of importance and priority. So for the last 20 years, I've been involved in activism in many different spaces. Paramount amongst those spaces include the Liberian Feminist Forum, but also in my work with ActionAid, I have been able to experience the work that civil society organizations are doing, women human rights defenders, and understanding my place as an INGO staff and a feminist. So I think naturally the default strategy for activism for me, and this is based on my life, is movement building, is the trust in movements. And it comes from a place where growing up, I was able to see women. I grew up in, one of the largest slums in Monrovia, Liberia. I'm Liberian. And there was a lot of economic activities for women, low-income women, people living in poverty. And one of the ways that our parents were able to provide for us was to join something that is called Susu. It's sort of, organic to West Africa, but I'm sure some people have the experience of what it means. It's basically a revolving fund system where women are able to put money into a pot and then, share at a particular time, or when a woman has a problem, she, gets access to the resources. So that is what I saw growing up. So it wasn't about one woman, it was about many women trying to make ends meet. Many of those women, you know, included family members, my mother, and whatever. Being a survivor of the Liberian Civil War, my understanding of the collective definitely shifted with the war, women standing up in the face of brutal atrocities, the mass action campaign. I'm sure some people are familiar with that. So in a way, I believe that movement building is important. How do I understand the whole idea of success and impact? I think we've heard, you know, I agree with everyone that first, this, to even review this, you have to come from a systemic approach as an enabler, as a policymaker. One of the things that we've done in Action Aid and even within the Liberian Feminist Forum is to first understand power. I think it was Latanya who talked about women not having, you know, single issued lives. So understand power and how that power within, you know, countries, within communities affect women, LGBTIQ people, young people. So to understand that means that when you say that I'm successful, you know, definitely, you know, that is not as simplistic, you know, as people, I think it was Kavita who mentioned that it's not about selling shoes. It's really about transformation, and transformation that is owned by those who have proximity, you know, the proximity to the issues that you're working on. It's also about the issue of legitimacy. So what is it that I have the power or I have the right to represent as the head of Women's Rights in Action Aid, as opposed to a woman in my grandmother's village who has experienced these issues, or who is a citizen of a particular country and can say, I want to stand up to my government. What is it that we consider to be change, to be impact? And is it grounded when I am speaking because of the power I have, or is it grounded because she has been able to do that as a citizen of a country and this is affecting her? So that's another thing. And to do that in Action Aid, we've been, I joined Action Aid 14 years ago because I like the fact that they use participatory methodologies. So it's not as simple as that. It was a point in Liberia where we had just, you know, it was the post-war context, and with the inequalities that existed even before the war, it was very interesting to see women and men sitting at the same table and having conversations. But these conversations were guided by, you know, participatory tools and different methodologies that ensured that everyone's voice was heard. So for me, that was, you know, very interesting. And we've been able to build on that with more processes, action reflection processes, ensuring that there's an intersectional feminist analysis to our program development processes, to our policy work, and also respecting the need to have meaningful engagement with people from different, you know, diverse backgrounds, that this is really important in terms of the work that we do.
Thank you so much, Koruto. Thank you. I think this is very inspiring. And I think this is the, you know, it's yes, you're working in an international organization, but you also have this grassroots experience, and you know, you are talking about how actual movements happen. You cannot work without everybody being there and being heard. So I'll come back to you, but thank you so much. And now my secret weapon, Heather, she's my secret weapon. And Heather Grady is Vice President, Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. Now Heather is really the Vice President of the Philanthropy Advisor San Francisco office, and leads the practice area of environments, rights, and global development, which means she advises a lot of philanthropists. If we want to change the ecosystem, here is our weapon. She also leads the Scaling Solutions Towards Shifting Systems initiative. She was previously Vice President for the Foundation Initiatives at the Rockefeller Foundation, where she oversaw an annual grant-making budget of averaging $65 million, and she serves on many boards. So as my secret weapon, Heather, and as the person who knows the philanthropy ecosystem, we need your advice in joining this movement. And what is your advice then? And what is the advice you give to these organizations aiming to partner for transformative impact? You're giving advice to these wonderful philanthropists. What type of advice would you give if we are, talking about this framework we're talking about? Would you advise them to be patient? I mean, give us your secret recipe.
Thank you very much, Iman. And I'm really honored to be on this panel with 7 other secret and not so secret weapons. And it's great to see my former colleague Mamadou as well. I want to just take apart this point and first talk about partnership and then transformative impact. So in terms of partnership, I just have a few comments. First of all, I think we need to look for collaborative people and collaborative institutions. By now we can recognize the fact that some people and some organizations are willing to, as they say, check their egos and check their logos at the door, and others who aren't. So collaboration really depends on a certain type of person. And I think many of you, talking about how we are internally thinking about how we are in relationship to others and so on is quite important. Related to that, having humility and the ability to listen and learn as people and as organizations. Those kinds of philanthropists and foundations are quite important. I think if you look at the recent, the movement, the strengthening and the strengthening of the racial justice and diversity, equity, and inclusion movements in the United States, and how different philanthropies have addressed that. It's very interesting to see how some have really embraced it and recognized their own weaknesses and challenges, and others who have sort of ignored it. So I think that's a part of what collaboration means. It also means making sure that we're sharing vision and purpose, even if our strategies and tactics differ, and privileging the voices and perspectives of those who are often less heard. Thinking about transformative impact, we can think about systems change. It can include incremental change or reform, which is maybe changing the rules of the system. Transformative change is really imagining the entirely new goals of a system, whether it's the system of philanthropy or a social system in a particular community or country. I think a problem in philanthropy in this sector is that many funders want to focus on what's achievable and doable, not on what is visionary and transformative. And what that has turned into as a practice in the sector is giving short-term goals that are oriented towards specific projects or specific tangible numbers, rather than the kind of change that all the rest of you have been talking about. It means changing the underlying conditions within which problems exist. It means embracing complexity as funders, focusing on changing underlying mental models, so our values and attitudes and beliefs, rather than starting at the level of specific policies or structures. It really means starting at that most fundamental level that one of the early systems thinkers, Donella Meadows, talked about. It means working across sectors, working with government and business, whether as allies or as targets of change, and understanding the unintended consequences of the work that we're doing. So again, I think all of the speakers have really talked about different aspects of this. This is not easy, but I think in philanthropy, through our work on an initiative we began called Scaling Solutions Toward Shifting Systems, we're seeing a lot of amazing work that different foundations and philanthropists are doing. But they're the leaders of the change. The majority of the sector is not working this way yet. Thanks.
Thank you so much, and a very good diagnosis. I mean, we should really copy what you said, because this is the diagnosis of the system. I'll go back to Peggy. Now, Peggy, you heard them all, and all of you said mainly the same thing. If we need to change the system, we need to be more participatory, we need to be more empathetic, we need to listen, we need to think long term. And you have really worked in many spaces with other philanthropists. And actually, the question will be the same to all of you. What do you think it would take to change the current definition? What is the how-tos? How do we start? We are now in the spreading of the, whatever we are spreading, like trying to change the definitions, and we all are on the same page. Peggy, from your experience, you've been there, you've led a lot of organizations, you are a philanthropist. How can we start?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And I've enjoyed the intervention so much. This is really a rich dialogue. So before I was really talking, it sounded as though I was really talking about social activists, social entrepreneurs needing to look inward to get the courage to be able to stand in the face of opposition, to be able to create a space at the table. But to me, one of the principal roles that philanthropists can play is to support that creation of the space at the table. And not just any neutral space. It's a space which advocates for the true listening and the true participation of those voices who are not heard, but in the context of building trust across whatever either vertical or horizontal divides may exist. So I believe very strongly in both the creation of a safe space, but safety is too easy. You also have to have the courage to risk going out of your own safety zone and speaking your truth. So it's a complicated dynamic, because if you get in a situation where there's too much either, let's say, rage or submission or whatever could come up in a conversation like that, then it's not going to be successful. So I want to now mention that it is equally important for people in a position to be philanthropists or business leaders or government leaders or whoever the more powerful segments of society are, to be willing to do their own work. And when I talked about bridging being a generally feminine quality, it is, but I'm talking about the masculine and the feminine, not men and women. So a truly important thing is that this quality of listening, of bridging, of reaching out across divides, we need to balance within ourselves, whether we're male or female, so that we have that aspect. So that if we're primarily in a masculine orientation of let's get this done, let's find a solution, and of course that's important too, that has to happen, but to balance it with the listening, the creating a safe environment, the having an open dialogue, so that the ideas from the grassroots can percolate up, so that the needs can be understood and appreciated, and to the extent that it's possible for those in more powerful positions to respond from their own place of power and their own place of lack of power. Because we can't expect any one person or any one organization to respond to all the needs. And that's why, going back to what Heather talked about collaboration, it's really important to have the different stakeholders at the table. It's not going to be just philanthropists and those seeking their philanthropic dollars. It's going to have to be people who are activists, who are bureaucrats, who are policymakers, who are philanthropists and business leaders. So I would just put that out as one of the ways that we need to get there, to get to the transformation that's needed, not just the Band-Aid solutions.
And Kavita, and then I want to ask Mamadou to corner Mamadou, but Kavita.
Thanks, Iman. I think, you know, we've talked a lot about questions around ecosystem. Let me say a few words that are specifically focused on the funding for this work, sitting as I do in a space of a philanthropy. I think one of the issues we have to understand is that there has been for a very long time now this idea that social entrepreneurs, particularly social entrepreneurs who are women, can and should sort of remain at the kind of small level. You know, it's like we still have this idea about micro enterprise, even though if you actually ever talk to Dr. Yunus, he never thought that micro enterprise was supposed to be like a magic solution to everything, right? It was because it was the one thing you could do when so many other things were broken. So I think one issue we need to think about as philanthropists is thinking about supporting the entire range of social entrepreneurship interventions, both individual grants of the kind that Ashoka makes possible for individuals who are starting, who have an idea, but then also organizational support for the organizations that these individuals end up creating. I've often fantasized about a collaborative between the Global Fund for Women and Ashoka, right? About being able to sort of have entrepreneurs know that their organizations would be able to get a grant that would then kind of, take them to the next level. And then you need to have the next level up from that. I mean, in this report that I'm reading, that Bridgespan and Echoing Green issued last year in May of 2020, one of the very clear indications is that in all of these philanthropic entities, there is inbuilt bias, there is inbuilt racism, there is inbuilt sexism, and they're not even aware of it. So when they say, oh, well, that person, I didn't know anybody who knew them. Well, it turns out 92% of all foundation leaders in the United States are white. 68% of the staff is white. Well, they're not going to know African Americans in the community. They're not going to know Arab women making change. They're not going to know the Sakinas in Afghanistan. So how do we shift this mentality that says, access is based on like who you know in philanthropy? And I think that is something, again, we have to really look at ourselves. Many philanthropies are like, oh, we don't accept unsolicited grants. Well, if you don't accept unsolicited grants, you're just going to hear from the people who already know you. So, that's another problem. That's an inbuilt structural problem for philanthropy. And if the people with billions of dollars are saying that, oh, we don't have the time to do unsolicited grants, let me tell you about the experience from Global Fund for Women, which Latanya can speak to. We accepted thousands of requests in hundreds of different languages. So it's not that you can't, it's that you don't want to. And I think that inside philanthropy, now it is time to really hold philanthropy's feet to the fire and say, listen, you can't wring your hands and say, oh, yes, of course, we know women are the solution. Of course, we know people of color should be included, but we can't change these structures, because it's too difficult for us. It's too time consuming. It's too costly. Please put the money where your mouth is and make sure that the resources that need to go to the people who most need them are actually going there. And I think for that, those of us who are in philanthropy have to speak out, but also people in the communities who need these monies must be more able to speak out freely. Right now, they live in a state of fear because, of course, if the funding is coming from those people, how can you criticize them? But I think for that, we need to do much more to build solidarity and say that this kind of exclusiveness that the world of philanthropy has wrapped itself up in is completely unacceptable. And we have public foundations, many feminist funds, Global Green grants, other publicly supported foundations, which can help us be allies in this work. And I think we need to do much more democratizing of philanthropy, which is still a very white and male business, especially in the United States, but all over the world.
Thank you so much. I call it subconscious discrimination or subconscious racism. And I have one of my dreams is to write all these blogs, but one day. But I agree with you, and I think I don't think it's just the white man guy. It's as Peggy was saying, it really has to do with the masculine mind and the white mind a little bit, or but that's another story. I would like to go to Mamadou because you are from the private sector, working in the private sector, which is fascinating for me, and you're a man. How are you going to help us? What is your commitment to help the movement? Yes, I put him in the corner. That's what I do. I've known him also for a long time. How can you make other men, whatever their ethnicity is, and the private sector join the movement, and just one step at a time? But we need to do something,
So thank you, Iman. And I think that everything that was said before, I just want to say that actually resonate very well with me, particularly with my background and where I know. So basically trying to bring all of these ideas into the private sector, into the corporate world. But one thing that, to answer your question, I think that oftentimes this movement, I would say, demands a lot from private sector, comes from a position of demand. And I believe that in the private sector, there are many companies that actually mean to do good, actually, because, there is a very strong business case for that. Today, for a company, in terms of long-term sustainability, really being a responsible company with purpose at the heart of what you do is really critical, right? Both in terms of, it is, research has shown that those corporates that actually have really strong social impact and purpose actually outperform those who don't. They actually attract more talent, particularly, you know, when we talk about millennials and et cetera and et cetera. But one of the things that we need to really think about is actually how do you help private sector understand this? And, you know, because one of the ways is that not lack of will oftentimes, but it's lack of knowledge or how to do this. And I feel that like this social sector oftentimes talk to each other too much. And probably that's what you were saying, your comfort zone, you know, and how do you really go to put yourself at discomfort and really engaging with those you don't talk to often, and actually really bringing the power of examples of things that work and how they can be actually transformed and scaled, you know, leverage and scale. So I think that it's really more about, we need your help to be able to help you, you know, and that's the way I will put it. So that dialogue needs to be created and maintained, you know, in a way that is productive.
Smart answer, but we're not out of the corner. We are there. Next time we have get us all the business guys and the people in the business sector you want. We are going to run more than the time, so I will ask Nadine, then Latanya, then Korto to tell us in 2 minutes how can we, what is the next step and what do you commit yourself to? Like, what would you recommend? And then I will ask the others, like, how are we moving from this meeting and getting Mamadou's friends to be on board, like the business guys? You know, what should we do? What is the next step? Then I'll go here. So this will be for everybody, like 1.5, 2 minutes each, please. Nadine?
So I'll go quickly on this to leave space for others to speak as well. I think we still have a lot of work to do on ourselves before we go out and engage others. I think even I talk at Porticus, we have put for ourselves this daring goal of 10 years to be really engaging the partners and for meaningful participation. But at the same time, we are looking at how inclusive we are internally. So although we are 75% women in the organization, we still have to broaden inclusion in all its meanings. So we are working on that. We are in the process of doing it. And also, of course, we reach out to others, and this is one of our goals. I disagree a little bit with Mamadou that he says that we are talking only amongst each others. I think we are not talking enough because we have to hold each other accountable more on doing more participation and bring the private sector with us on that.
Okay. Thank you very much. I actually think we try to reach also to business guys. So now it's Mamadou who will introduce us because they don't always respond. Korto, what do you think is the step and what is your recommendation? Okay, Korto. So Latanya, can you speak first until I hope Korto's around?
Sure, and I'll try to go a little quickly. And I hear the echo, Iman, so you might want to mute. And so if we accept the, you know, as we've been all speaking here today, that, you know, women's human rights are essential to social, economic, and political change, and we accept the proposition that local partners and local leaders drive solutions in their own communities for the change that they want to see happen, then I think we have to go to that next step and that thread from, as Kavita was saying, about the social entrepreneur to their organization, and now to that collective action and the movements that Korto, I think, was talking about. And we have to make sure we're funding social movements, particularly from our case, gender justice movements that are led by those that are most impacted and marginalized. And this collective group of partners, as we see it at Global Fund for Women, is going to be crucial to this conversation around scale. because they're really the ones, and I mean, we've seen research that shows that social movements are the ones that create and sustain this long-term change. And so us figuring out, doing our own work, I think, as Nadine was saying, and figuring out how to make sure those collectives are funded and that we're providing them core flexible funding long-term, and that we're giving to these communities to impact this systemic oppression that we're seeing around the world, and that we're shifting the decision making to the local level. And so, and when I say we need to find them, I'm very serious that if we're talking about trust-based relationships, if we're talking about sort of shifting the power and the privilege that we see, then we really are going to have to get away from these notions that community members, community organizations, and social movements have to come find the funding all the time. I think we have to put the onus on ourselves to be there when it's the appropriate time and to be able to tap into relationships that require this kind of funding. And I just wanted to speak to the comment about us, just speaking to ourselves. I do agree that we also need to speak to those that feel differently than us, and that and it's our job to try to convert those who think differently or who take approaches that may not have been working for a long time, but because of the power dynamics involved in those relationships, want to maintain the way that we do this work. And I feel like that's a big point that we've made here today, is that we can't do things that we've always done, and that we have to lean back into the trust, particularly when we're working with women and on gender issues that we find. And so show us how to talk to those that need to be converted, because I'm all in. So thank you, Iman.
To trust me, to talk to others. And if you notice, in every meeting, if we're meeting in sessions that has women, men are usually 6% of the attendees. So we had to go around it in one session called it impact assessment, so that we can talk about scale. But anyway, I will not make my final remarks. I will want every one of you to just say one sentence of advice or recommendation or commitment. I start with Heather, then I'll go to Nadine, then Kavita, then Peggy, then Latanya, and Mamadou disappeared. We scared him. Okay. So Heather.
Okay, one sentence of advice. I'm going to cheat and say, just by coincidence, I published a blog today. It's called System Shifts in Philanthropy, Giving Credit Where Credit is Due. And it is talking about how to influence funders, believe me, grantees and organizations and program partners have tried, but it's difficult. Funders are influenced more by peer funders. Look at the great practices that exist. Democracy Frontlines Fund, Global Green Grants Fund, the Narada Foundation in China, Mackenzie Scott, Ana Maria Aguilagos, head of Hispanics in Philanthropy. These are mostly women-led, but there are also some led by others that are terrific. We have to push ourselves harder and be more responsive. Thank you.
Corto, can you hear me? Corto, because we can't see you.
I was on mute because I wasn't speaking.
Okay, can you give us just your advice, like the last sentence of what you think the next step should be?
Yeah, I want to focus on what we should do, given the power we have and the reach we have, especially as, an organization like ActionAid, that there are a few things that we tend to do that, either disintegrates the movement or disrespects the work of people who are working on a day-to-day basis. So the first is to not invest in the individual. So there's this thing that we do where we have heroes. So there is one person who represents the movement, and we give them like a crown and say, you are the one, you're the success of the movement. I think that is something we should stop doing. We should do more funding at the front line, understanding that the people who do the work, the women who do the work, whether it's, women human rights defenders, people working on economic justice, it's important to fund their organizations and understand that not every organization would be would have the, the framing of what governments expect, the capacity of what big NGOs expect. So it's important to get the money to the people who need it. And last, I think it's important for us to learn together, because there is a changing, dynamics around the way that movements operate, the way that women's rights organizations work, and we need to learn that with them. So yeah, that's all from me.
Thank you. Latanya, quick word. Then Nadine, then Peggy. Quick words. Can you hear me?
Sorry, I couldn't come off of mute as well. Just listen, thank you, Iman, for this opportunity. I'll just say really quickly that we need to continue supporting local feminist movements, and we want to create the change on their terms and not on ours. And so I'm super, I'm super excited about being able to do that with Global Fund for Women. And so I'll leave it at that. Over to you, Kavita.
I'll speak from the perspective of private philanthropy, and I agree with Heather that we are in a position to influence others, but even within private philanthropy, unfortunately, while women are the majority of those who work in private philanthropy, disproportionately decisions and leadership positions at boards and other senior levels are held still primarily by white men. And so I think a lot more pressure is going to have to come from outside, honestly, that will actually shine a light on that practice, which is right now completely unaccountable. And I personally believe that philanthropy should be pushing for higher taxpayers, for higher taxes in the United States, because I do not think philanthropy is the solution to these deeply entrenched problems. And so I personally think as philanthropists, we should be pushing for less money to be sequestered in high-income philanthropy and more money to be paid by these same people in wages to their workers and in taxes. Thank you.
Yeah, so quickly, I think from my perspective, start changing ourselves first. There is still a lot to do for us internally in our own philanthropies. And don't underestimate peer pressure. I think this is how we hold each other accountable as well. We start a movement also among philanthropies to change things for the better and stop doing what didn't work in the past. And thank you.
Oh, can you hear me? Nadine, you're disappearing. Okay, Peggy,
I'm not
can
sure
you say the last sentence? No, Nadine, can you say the last sentence?
Just saying thank you for starting this movement and for inviting us all to be part of it.
Thank you. I think we need to continue to bring together networks, but bringing more and more diverse networks. So increasingly networks of feminist networks from the grassroots together with philanthropists, et cetera, to learn together and build trust together, and from that, then take action.
Thank you so much, all of you. I mean, this has been such a powerful, and I have decided, because I'm democratic, as you know, that you're all now parts of the WISER movement and you're our secret weapons. And this will continue, because if you know me, I never get. And there have been some changes, Kavita, even within Ashoka, with regards to the WISE movement, but also because of with everyone a change maker, we have to give them the space to be. Thank you very much for being here. And poor Mamadou disappeared, so thank you, Mamadou, also, although you're not here. And you'll hear from me. And have a wonderful week, and have a wonderful Women's Month and Women's Decade and Women's Millennium.
You too, Iman.
Thank you, Iman. Thanks, everyone.